Good morning and greetings, everyone. I'm Trushar Patel. I work at the University of Lethbridge as a Canada Research Chair in RNA Protein Biophysics and an Associate Professor here. Today, we have Dr. Joy Johnson from Simon Fraser University, President and Vice-Chancellor of Simon Fraser University. So as a part of this Canadian Science Policy Commission program, we are going to have some conversations with Dr. Johnson. So good morning, Dr. Johnson, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning. It's such a pleasure to join you. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Appreciate that. So, Dr. Johnson, my first question for you is that you have had a very remarkable career. You had a PhD in nursing, and now you are the president of one of the most prestigious universities, and your career has different paths. So could you tell someone like me and other early career researchers and the students what would your advice be on career?
Well, thanks, Trushar. It's interesting, when I was a young girl growing up, if someone asked me, what do you want to do? I don't think I would ever thought of answering, I want to be a university president. And I think that's true when I was in my 20s and in my 30s as well. You're right. I started my career as a nurse and loved my career as a nurse and went back to graduate school and loved research and had a fabulous research career. And I think for me, when I look at the opportunities that I've had, the advice I would have is follow your passions. And that's what I started with, is following something I was very interested in. But also look for opportunities and be open to opportunities. I think so often, and I think particularly for women, we don't put ourselves forward for roles. And there's good scientific evidence on this, that women who feel they might not be quite qualified won't put themselves forward. But often men who don't feel themselves quite qualified will. They'll benchmark themselves, they'll, put themselves out there. And so I think particularly for women, for people who might not really believe that these opportunities are open for them, I would really encourage them, to step up and to think about pursuing opportunities. So that would be my advice.
This is great advice. Thank you, and you are right to all the points that you mentioned. There is also a gap in workplaces, and that puts nicely to our second question, which is, despite a lot of efforts made by a lot of institutions and the government agencies, we are still very far from implementing the EDI effectively in academia. And so, as you pointed out already, what would be your advice? How do we move forward to address this effectively in academia, especially?
Well, thanks. I do agree that while we have made very important strides in relation to equity, diversity, and inclusion, we still have a long way to go. And when I became president last year in September, I indicated to my community that equity, diversity, and inclusion was a priority for me, and I would make it a priority for the university. And so that's what I think step number one. I think tone on top matters. I think leadership matters in this regard. And it's been interesting for me, Trushar, because I would say that I've been pleasantly surprised about how many people have embraced this. When I've indicated it's a priority, I've seen a number of groups get activated, a number of plans being put in place. And so that's encouraging. The other thing for me, and I think we all realize this past year has really shone a light on inequities in a very new way for all of us. Actually, the past 2 years. And, this is no longer a nice thing to do. It's no longer, something that we should potentially think about. We must address inequity. And so I really do believe institutions are starting to think about this. I certainly see our Tri-Council granting agencies doing work in this regard. I see most universities moving forward. Is there resistance? Absolutely. And I guess I would say this is about full-scale culture change. And so while, again, tone on top matters, it's about everyone leaning in hard having conversations, uncomfortable conversations about what it means to be inclusive, and really examining our practices. Because I think, I will admit that a number of institutions, including my own, have not fully thought through the ways in which particular practices, our bureaucracies, might actually be creating barriers for people to be fully included and progress in the way they'd like to within our university. So a lot of work to be done, but I really am heartened to see some progress being made.
Thank you. And this is great that you mentioned that last year we had new realities that came in about some sort of inequalities. So no conversation these days would go without mentioning of the pandemic. And it nicely brings to our next question, which is that the COVID-19 pandemic has continued to pose many challenges on many institutions and so on. And I'm sure SFU had their own challenges, some of the common with other institutions, some of uncommon. So what would your take-home message be, or mitigation strategies that you had to employ to come out of this pandemic, or at least address some of these challenges?
Yeah, so it's very interesting. I think you're right. Every institution has experienced a number of challenges. One of the things that I think, and I think this is interesting from a science policy standpoint, is that, I think it's really challenging to try to implement data-informed decision-making right now. And this is, and in part because all the evidence in the world is not necessarily going to make people feel better. People are fearful. People are really concerned about their personal health. And that's what we're seeing at our university. And even though the evidence might suggest that we have very, very high vaccination rates among our faculty, staff, and students, even though the evidence might suggest that rapid testing actually is not all that efficacious, these seem to be measures that really are comfort measures that people are wanting to see put in place. And that's one of the things I've really struggled with, is trying to make some determinations about evidence-informed implementation. In British Columbia, one thing I would say that's been very, very helpful is that the post-secondary sector, for the most part, has worked together. So we haven't had individual institutions going out in front of others making announcements. We have worked together as a sector. I think there's a lot of strength in that because I think, again, from a communication standpoint, it's very, very confusing for the community when different universities are rolling out different procedures, policies, et cetera. And so that's been quite heartening in British Columbia. And then the final thing for me that's been very important, and this goes back to the evidence, is to work with our public health officials. If we're not going to work with our public health officials right now, what does that say about how we value evidence? And so I really want to take my hat off to our leaders in this area, Teresa Tam federally, and on my province, Bonnie Henry. They have been on the front line, gathering the data, thinking about what's required, providing, just-in-time advice for us. And I think, for me as a leader of an institution, as someone who really values science, values evidence, it's really important to be aligned. So that's been interesting as well. But we'll see. I mean, I'm talking to the first week of September, and our students come back to class next week. And, tensions are high, and it all will start to unfold in the next while. I'm very confident. We've got a great community here. I'm pretty confident that things will go well. But again, we just have to be gentle with each other.
Yeah, no, I agree. And so one of the points also that you mentioned indirectly, and I want to highlight, is that we have had one of the positive side of this was that we have seen a lot of women leaderships across the country with a lot of health ministers, but also federally as well. So that's one of the great outcomes. Switching gears a little bit. So SFU delivered a while ago an Aboriginal and reconciliation reports. So I was wondering if there has been any follow-up actions done until today, and we had can we have any updates from you if possible?
Yeah, so following the National Truth and Reconciliation Commission report with a number of calls to action, we ourselves as a university undertook a process to determine what we as an institution needed to do. And there was a number of calls to actions that we have committed to and have made progress on a number of them. But there are some areas that we, and again, when I stepped into the presidency in September, said, we got to kind of double down here and work very, very hard to continue our commitments. So there are some things that are particularly exciting for me right now. We are just about to finalize plans for developing a new First Peoples Gathering House on our campus. Place and space is important. Places to actually provide opportunities for our Indigenous faculty, staff, and students to come together, to have ceremony. It's very, very important. And so that's a great step forward, a great signifier of the importance of our Indigenous communities. The other thing is we're moving forward to hire a leadership role at the university, and our provost is leading that process in conjunction with Chris Lewis, who's a member of our Squamish Nation, to really think carefully about what this leadership position would be and what it needs to do. We also commissioned a report recently on pathways for Indigenous students into Simon Fraser University. And it's a really robust evidence-informed report about what are the best practices to support Indigenous students to come into our universities and succeed. And we're moving forward in that regard. We're signing memorandums of understanding with host nations, the nations whose our campuses reside, trying to think about ways we can work together. And so all of these things, are very, very positive. And I'd say finally, for us, we've hired a number more Indigenous faculty, and that really sets the tone as well. Indigenous faculty are in high demand right now, I would say, across all sectors or all areas of research. But we've been fortunate to hire a number, and that also, I think, is a very important symbol, but they also offer so much. And I think the other thing we've recognized is that when you only have a handful of Indigenous faculty and staff, you lean on them too hard. So you've got to increase the numbers and really figure out how to, change the dynamic. I think the next challenges for us are around indigenizing our curriculum and thinking about ways that we can actually embed Indigenous knowledge in our work. And I know, for example, our Dean of the Faculty of Environment is right now working hard to think about in the Faculty of Environment how land-based learning, something that's very important for many Indigenous peoples, could be incorporated into that faculty's pedagogy. So that's another example. So much happening. It's really, really encouraging.
This is really great. This is awesome, and on behalf of the entire community, I thank you, Dr. Johnson, for making the reconciliation as one of your priorities as the president of SFU. This is very heartening. So moving on topic a little bit. SFU recently also cleaned up all the 2021 BC Clean Tech Awards. So what makes SFU really awesome place to be in terms of the clean tech?
Yeah, I'm so proud of the record of achievement of SFU around clean tech. And I think there's two things that creates this magic here right now. We have a new energy systems engineering program. So we are recruiting really amazing faculty to teach in that faculty members to teach in that program, and they're bringing their research, and there's a lot of excitement there. But I would say also we really have got a great innovation ecosystem. So we're supporting our researchers to also think about how they can take an invention and move it into an innovation that can actually be scaled up. And then finally, we've got a lot of clean tech companies here in BC who want to work with our faculty. And we're really thinking hard about ways in which we can kind of change things around and make ourselves ready to work with industry in new ways. And I think all of this, all of these kind of initiatives are really helpful in terms of helping us create more connectivity with industry. Create opportunities for our researchers so that they can spin out and be successful. And it's working, obviously. And it was so gratifying. And now we're seeing our province also really, and also federally, we know as well, really committing to work in this area. So I think we're just going to see more and more growth in terms of clean technology and innovation.
That is also a very positive outcome, and again, it reflects your leadership on that side as well. So thank you. And so that brings to nicely your next question on the climate change and extreme weather conditions. So what has SFU done, and what are the plans to address some of the essential environmental challenges that we are all going through? We had very smoky summers, and now they are increasingly becoming smokier. So obviously, this is a great challenge for all of us.
Yeah, so absolutely. And it's interesting, our students really are also pushing us to, and we've been having conversations just at my executive team this week about our response to the climate emergency. It's interesting because our students are really wanting us to declare a climate emergency. And let me say, from the beginning, absolutely, we've got a climate emergency. And I think we all recognize that. And I think for us, beyond making a declaration, it's what are you doing? I don't think declarations are enough. And so what are we doing? So there are a number of things, and I'll just point to a few. One is we're trying to decrease our own carbon footprint. And so we've, introduced a biomass station that will provide energy for our campus and our community. And that's really decreasing our carbon footprint, number one. But we're doing other things on the sustainability front as well to think about how we can be greener. And so that's very, very positive. We're also looking at our investments and trying to make sure that we are prudent about where we make investments and trying to make sure that we are thinking about sustainability. And then finally, I would say our researchers and also our partnerships with our communities are pushing us to also think about what we can do. And so there's a lot of interest across our universities in sustainable cities, and we're really proud of our record of achievement, for example, around the Times Higher Education Impact rankings, that in terms of sustainable cities, we've done very well because we do have a record of achievement in this regard. So I think it's, when you talk about what we all need to do as a university or as university communities, I think it's kind of two-pronged. It's what we can do with our own carbon footprint, and so we're paying attention there. But it's also what we can do on the research front and the partnership front as well, to work with communities to provide our best advice. And I think we will continue. We're moving into a strategic planning process, and I can just well imagine that all of this work of sustainability is going to need to feature very strongly in our work going forward.
And I thank you for that approach, and I really wish you all the very best to get as much outcome as possible out of this. I would also like to thank you and SFU for your support as an active member of the CSPC community. And what would you see as the biggest benefit and the value for attending and supporting the CSPC events and the activities?
Well, first of all, I think this is a great organization, and I've alluded to it in this conversation already. As universities, we really need to lift up and make sure that we are really highlighting the importance of evidence-informed policy, science-informed policy. And so that's why this organization is so important. And so that's number one. But number two, and I'm really hoping that we will all eventually find ourselves in a time when we'll all join together in Ottawa again. What a fantastic way to meet colleagues across the country, to engage with policymakers and politicians. It's also, I've always said at the Canadian Science Policy Conference, it's what happens in the room, but also what happens in the hallways. Those conversations, opportunities to really connect, to hear, what is kind of top of mind for policymakers as well, is so valuable for universities. So I really think the work of this organization is incredibly important, and I'm really very, very pleased to support it.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your feedback. And so thank you, Dr. Johnson, again, for spending time with us, providing insights into the range of topics that you are very passionate about. We wish you all the very best, and we look forward to having you again with us in the future. As you said, maybe next year in person we have CSPC 2022, and we'll see you in Ottawa.
Yeah, let's hope so, Trushar. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you.
Hello?